Good morning and welcome to this week's edition of NCompass Live. I am your host, Krista Burns, here at the Nebraska Library Commission. NCompass Live is the Library Commission's weekly online event where we cover any commission activities or anything that may be of interest to librarians across the state. We do these sessions every Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. Central Time. They last about an hour, depending, and they are free and they are recorded. So if you're not able to attend one of our in-person sessions, our live sessions, you can always watch any of our recordings that we have out there. This week we have our Library Commission's Technology Innovation Librarian, Michael Sauers, here to give us a brief introduction to CSS for doing our website. So I will just hand things over to Michael to go ahead and take it away.
All right, thanks, Krista. And this is I get to do this 2 weeks in a row now. Of course, you do it every week, so Okay, I shouldn't complain. No. Okay, no, this was my idea too. Yes. All right, hello, welcome back. Those of you who don't know me, I'm the Michael Sauers. I'm the Technology Innovation Librarian here at the Commission, and one of the things I do or have done for the past 16 years is work with creating websites, starting with HTML back in library school when the web happened in '94, and working into CSS as that came along. And I've taught many classes over the years in this, and so to kind of explain what Chris said about brief, I typically do this as a 6-hour hands-on workshop. So here I have about 50 to 55 minutes to cover this, and I could easily do a second 6-hour hands-on workshop if necessary. There is so much material here. So what I'm going to do is it's going to be a kind of a very brief introduction. We're going to kind of go over the history and the whys and wherefores of it. I will be writing some code, show you some examples. I know I like having Krista in the room this time because she has a very little bit of CSS experience. So and hopefully we'll have some good questions.
Trying to get more.
Yes, trying to get more. And if you have any questions in the audience, please feel free to submit them through the Q&A or raise your hand. We'll turn your mic on, that sort of thing. So what is CSS? It is not Charlie Sheen syndrome. Sorry, that's word. Okay, sorry, I had to throw that joke in there. I heard somebody say that the other day, and I was like, "Ooh, that stands for CSS." All right, okay. No, sorry, CSS, Cascading Style Sheets. It's code. I'm going to assume that by listening to this, you have a vague grasp of HTML or XHTML. It is a different language that you use in conjunction with a markup language, such as such as HTML, XHTML, or some variant of XML, to control how that content is presented to the user. Now, anybody with some experience, and I'll just stick to HTML as our simple example here. If you have any experience with HTML, you know that there is some presentation built into it. For example, if you code something as a paragraph, it generally will be left justified, black text on a white background at a default sort of font size. But if you were to code something as an H1, a heading, generally it will still be left justified, black text on a white background, but it will be big and bold. Okay? Or if you code something as a block quote, typically then the text, the margins for the left and the right will be moved in because you're quoting a larger period kind of text. And that was the original intention of a markup language like HTML, was to give structure to content. To say this is a paragraph, this is a heading, this is a block quote, this is a list. As another example. However, and that was fine at first because the first browsers were not graphical. They were text only. Okay. Then came Mosaic. Remember Mosaic?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, 1994. Mosaic came out, the first graphical browser. I was at the University at Albany library, and as a grad student, I remember downloading that the first I heard about it. I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. Up until then, I was building Gopher sites. I mean, this is, so anyways, memory lane. Sorry, sidetracked a little there. Anyways, as graphical browsers came along, browsers started to say, well, we're going to show a paragraph this way. We're going to show a heading this way. We're going to show a block quote this way and a list this way because it's now visual content. Okay. Then HTML started to evolve to include more presentational style sorts of things, such as tables. Okay. Now, tables are still structural, but we'll come back to tables in a moment. Or the font element, where font, face equals Arial, size equals 4, alignment equals right, that sort of thing. And the problem is that HTML was never designed to do that. HTML was designed to give structure to content. Presentation was built into it, added to it eventually because that's what people wanted. And especially when you get to tables, it gets really messy because what tables do, or what tables are meant to do, is to present tabular data. Okay, a spreadsheet, that sort of thing. The problem is people figured out very quickly, and I did this myself, everybody did this in web design, was that they took tables and turned off the lines and used it as a grid system for displaying content, for laying out content on a page.
It was a good way of
manipulating
what you had.
It did the job. It created a grid, and then you can manipulate the grid, and you can put things where you want it. Trouble is, tables were never meant to do that. It was a kludge. People were making do with what they had. And what this ended up doing is creating what people lovingly call tag soup. Okay, if you ever created a web page using Word,
don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. You get tag soup. It puts font around every individual thing. It lays things out in tables, and it creates basically an unworkable document. So what was then developed was this concept of cascading style sheets. And the basic concept behind it is you are separating structure, which you use here with your markup language, from style or presentation, which is what your style sheet language does. Okay? So you can create a very simple document with HTML or XHTML that says this is a heading, this is a paragraph, this is a list. And then using CSS in conjunction with that, you can say, here is how I want it displayed to the user. That you separate those two concepts. In the CSS, you say, I want my paragraphs to look like this. I want my headings to look like this. I want my list to look like this. And oh, by the way, I want them over here on the screen as opposed to over here on the screen. Okay? These are all things you can do with CSS. Okay? Once you grasp the concept of separating those two things, you get some very significant benefit out of doing that. And this is what my next slides are. And that one is not as readable as I expected. I apologize. But benefit number one is content. Is it readable? Okay, good. I lost my font in some translations here, so I apologize for that. And these benefits, by the way, there's 6 of them I got listed. These are not in any particular order. Okay, they're just the 6 benefits. Content creators can focus on content. Okay. In other words, the people who are actually writing the content of your website don't have to worry about all of the stuff that says, here's how I want it to look. This is really a benefit for those of us who are writing websites with other people. Okay. If it's all just you, well, you got to worry about everything. Okay. But in a larger organization, I'll just use the commission as an example here. What we do is we set up the style. We say, here's how the pages are going to look. And then the people who write the content can just write the content and not have to worry about how is the H1 going to look, how are the paragraphs going to look, how are the lists going to look. They just write the content, they write some HTML, and then the CSS, which has been established by other people, completely takes over. Okay? So you're actually reducing the amount of work other people need to do in certain circumstances. Okay, that's benefit number one. Benefit number two, design enforcement. Okay, and I kind of just touched upon that a little bit. I've been in organizations where you have literally a dozen people working on the website across the organization, or more. And I've even been in the situation where the organization went through a website redesign, and even though pretty much all of those dozen people were in the exact same meeting that decided here is how the website is going to look, by the time they got back to their desks, everybody had a slightly different recollection about what the decision was. Okay? And so the problem was that we weren't using CSS at the time. So one person thought, well, I thought the committee decided that H1s are going to be green and centered and 14-point type. And somebody else said, well, I thought they were going to be blue and right justified and 16-point type. I'm being a little extreme here, but it was more subtle than that. But the problem was that since everybody had to worry about content and style, not everybody exactly decided. So the next time we redesigned, we created a style guide that was kind of a narrative. We actually created a style guide for the website with color swatches and everything. I mean, it was pretty cool. But when we wrote the design into the CSS, those content creators, again, just had to focus on the content, write one little piece of code that said, go pay attention to those style rules over there. And once they did that, we could now enforce our design. They had to consciously do something else to override that design.
And also what's cool about that, if the design needs to change, am I getting anything?
That's one of my benefits. But it's good. You're thinking ahead of me. I like that. Okay. Benefit number 3, write once, use many. Okay. The joy of CSS, which I'll kind of show towards the end of this talk, is that you can write that one style sheet and have it apply to all of your pages. You could write 2 style sheets and have one of them apply to some of your pages and have another one apply to other pages. In other words, you don't have to, you're modularizing the code. Okay? You're saying, I've written that over here. Even though I've got 7,000 pages on my website, I don't have to write the style 7,000 times. I can just write it once and tell those 7,000 pages, go pay attention to that one piece of code. Huh? Here you go, Krista. Redesign made easier.
When you want to change something in the whole page, you just have to do it in one place, then it automatically populates, changes all those pages and back to it.
Let's, for simple example, let's say we have set the background color to all 7,000 pages to be blue. Okay? And because we've written that in a CSS file that's set over to the side, we decide next week that, you know what, we want the background color to be yellow instead. Well, pre-CSS, you had to go through 7,000 pages and change background equals blue to background equals yellow. Painful.
You even with say tools. The heck with it, we don't care. We'll
yes, exactly. Okay. Now what we can do, since we have that one piece of code set aside, where it says background blue, we can change that to background yellow, and instantaneously the page is loaded for anybody who comes to the website. It says, hey, the background's not now yellow. Please make it yellow. And you've just completely redesigned the site. Okay.
That's cool.
That right there, I think, was the biggest thing that sold me on CSS when I first heard about it well over 10 years ago. CSS is not new. Forgot to mention that.
But it's new to lots of people.
Well, it's new to lots of people, but CSS has been around. Yeah. Okay, and I'll throw in here too, any browser that's vaguely current supports CSS. Now, some browsers don't support everything in CSS, and there's still some quirks and blah, 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 blah. But
you still do have to look at your page in various browsers to make sure it's
always,
looking how you want.
Yes.
I've had that problem, that issue.
But
we fix it.
There's a lot of CSS that is completely consistently.
But it's been that way always. Whenever you do any web page in history, no matter what you're using, you always had to view it in various browsers to make sure it was looking how you want.
Exactly.
It's a browser thing, not a
yes, it's a browser thing, not a code thing necessarily. Yeah. And I realize, you know, those of you, I've been through redesigns. You never want to think about it. But I'll tell you, you start using CSS, it makes your redesigns a lot easier in the long run. Unless you're completely redoing the whole site from the ground up, that's a separate issue. But it can make it a lot easier. Benefit 5, different styles for different media. Okay, so I got my little guy here, and he's looking at a screen, and he's watching on a television and maybe a mobile device or reading in print. With some advanced features of CSS, you can actually have the exact same web page be displayed differently based on the media that the viewer is using to view your content. Okay. So, think about, a 23-inch flat panel monitor, widescreen monitor, and your iPhone.
Yeah.
Do you want it to look exactly the same? Now, the iPhone can do it, but it's going to jam everything into a little dinky square.
It's going to be hard to read, yeah.
And you're going to have to zoom, and you're going to have to do all those other things. What CSS you can do in theory, this is some advanced stuff we probably won't actually get to, but is you can say, well, if they're viewing it on a mobile device, make it look like this. If they're viewing it on a screen, make it look like this. If they're viewing it in print, make it look like this. Get rid of all the fancy schmancy colors if they're going to print it.
Yeah.
Get rid of the ads. There's a nice thing. It's, we don't have ads on our website anyway. Not libraries. Not yet, anyways. Depends on how the budget goes. Anyways, sorry. So, now you're even adding more flexibility because of CSS. And speaking of flexibility, the last benefit is increased accessibility. Okay. Because, and we can almost do a whole presentation on accessibility issues with websites. Okay. But you can, when you separate that structure from the style, I'll boil this down to the most straightforward way accessibility has helped. A user, let's say with visual impairments, can completely turn off your style sheet and turn on their own. A user can say, I am visually impaired, I must have everything on the screen be at least 24-point type, and I want it white on a black background.
Because that's easier to read.
Not only can they turn off your style so that everything's black and white left justified, they can, if they want, add their own style that overrides yours to make it so they can read it. This is where it gets fun because you spend all this time designing a website, okay? Whether it be months or years. And then ultimately what I'm telling you is all of that design you put into your website,
they don't see it.
A user can completely turn it off. Okay. But as frustrating as that may be, okay, you want the user to be able to read your content.
Yeah.
And if that's what they need to do to be able to read your content, that's the goal. Yes, you want it to look nice, but you want them to be able to get it and read it, ultimately. So those are the kind of 6 major benefits to using CSS. Okay. Are there any questions coming in from the audience?
No.
Krista's monitoring? No? Okay. All right. So I will continue to move on. Okay. So what does CSS look like? It kind of looks like this. In HTML or XHTML, you have tags, elements, attributes, and values. The tags are the angle brackets. Body would be an element. Color equals red would be a proper attribute and a value, just as a review. In CSS, you have selectors and declarations. And in the declaration, you have a property and you have a value. And instead of equal signs and quotation marks and angle brackets, you use braces, or squirrely brackets, as some people like to call them. Okay, braces would be here and here. You have colons, which separate your properties and your values. And then you will also see, as I start writing some code, semicolons. Okay? So braces, colons, and semicolons are kind of your important bits when it comes to CSS. And basically, if you think about it, this example really shouldn't be that difficult to figure out what it does. Krista, what do you think this does? She's never seen this before.
Everything in the body is Arial
Yep,
font.
yep. I have just set all of the text in my document, because everything's inside the body of the document, to be Arial. One line, all done, and I can make that apply to all 7,000 pages. Okay. That's what it looks like. Your selector is the thing you want to change. Okay. Generally, it will line up with an HTML element, such as body or H1 or P for paragraph or whatever. But it doesn't have to. You can make up your own. We'll get to that. Font family, or this declaration here, is what you want to do to the selector. So I want to do something to the body. What do I want to do? I'm declaring what I want to do. And then the declaration is made up of property and value pairs. What do I want to change as part of that? And what do I want to change it to? If I wanted to change the background color of the body, instead of font-family, I would use background-color, colon, space, and then red. And I would have just set my background color to red. All right. Now, there are ways to implement CSS, and there's a whole bunch of CSS example over here in the upper left. You can kind of ignore that. It's these three right here: external, embedded, and inline. And I will attempt to demonstrate all of these very shortly. But let me talk about each one of these briefly. External is that I'm going to write a single CSS file and apply it to 7,000 pages.
That's what we did with my site.
Yes, that's what we did with your page. Okay, and 7,000, it could be 2 pages. Okay, as long as it's more than one, you want to use an external style sheet. Okay, the idea is that the CSS file is separate from your actual web pages, and then you write a piece of code in each of your web pages that said, please go pay attention to that CSS file. Okay, and that's what allows that flexibility and that redesign and the right one to use many. Embedded CSS is going to go in the head of your HTML document. And that will only affect that document. Huh? What I usually say is when you're first playing around, write it all in one document. Because that way you're not editing multiple files. And then when you've got it set, then separate it out and make it an external style sheet. And when I show most of my examples, I'm going to be working with embedded because it just makes life a little easier. And then there's what's called inline. And what inline does is it says, for example, this is an actual example of inline styles. And actually that's not an example of inline styles. Take me back. That's an example of a class, which we'll completely come back to later. But inline means I want to do this on a particular paragraph. Okay, so in a particular page. So let me carry this through for a second. I can say something like, paragraphs are going to be in Arial. And if I want all of my paragraphs to be in Arial on every single page, I would put that in an external style sheet. But then let's say on a particular page, I want all the paragraphs to be in Times New Roman. I would embed that on the particular page.
So it's a one-page thing.
It's a one-page thing. And then if I want a particular paragraph on that particular page to be in Calibri, I would put that inline on that particular paragraph. Okay. And this actually gets me ahead to another slide, which is called the cascade. In other words, what order are the rules paid attention to?
Yeah, I was wondering about the whole cascade.
The cascade. Well, I just explained it even though I'm on a different slide.
That kind of makes sense.
Okay, so we'll come back to the cascade in a little bit. So let's go ahead and jump in and get a little messy. Let's actually write some code. Okay. All right. Okay, so what we're going to do here is I'm going to use a service I literally found last week called Paste HTML. This is actually pretty cool. It does lots of different things, but one of the things it will allow me to do is it will allow me to write some code and then preview it kind of all on their system without having to install anything else. Okay. So, for example, here it is giving me a very basic, happens to be XHTML, but that's not too much of an issue. If you don't know the difference between HTML and XHTML, don't worry about it. And what I can do here is I can click this, publish this page, and what it's going to do is it's going to show me now in this window what that page looks like if I was to view it in a browser. Okay, so we're just going to kind of use that back and forth as a little kind of a test environment here. Okay, so, and the other thing I'm going to do just to make our lives a little interesting is I'm actually going to go to this website called Lorem Ipsum. You know that Latin that people use for you know, completely
Filler
means
text.
nothing, filler text. This is actually a website that will allow you to actually say, I want 5 paragraphs of random Latin. And it will say, okay, here are 5 paragraphs of random Latin for you. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to copy all that. Oops. All over here. And I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to go back here. And I'm going to replace their text with my stuff here, which according to this browser is completely misspelled. That's fine. And I'm going to put it into paragraphs. So give me a sec here to do this. This is the fun part of the presentation where you get to watch me type a lot. And am I on 3 or 4 or 5? I'm on 4. Okay. Oops, I just got rid of a letter. Oh, well.
Like we know.
Yeah, I know. I
don't know.
Doesn't matter. Okay, so basically what I've got here now is I've got a 5-paragraph web page. Okay, and let's go take a look at what it looks like. And this is it. I've done nothing to it. It is completely default. It is black text, white background, left justified. Skip a line in between each paragraph. It's exactly what HTML has told it to do. Okay. Now we're going to start playing around with some CSS. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to embed my CSS. Okay. I'm going to use that kind of middle of the 3 options. Okay. Because I only have 1 page to work with. Okay. So I'm going to scroll back up. And what you do to embed some CSS is you actually put it in the head of your document. Okay. So I'm going to create some space to work in between my start head and my end head. Okay. And the first thing I need to do is I need to write a little HTML. Oops, CAA. Can't type and talk at the same time. Okay. That basically is telling it, in between start style and end style, I am going to give it some CSS code. So in other words, please stop interpreting this as HTML. Interpret this as CSS. Okay? So now I ask myself, what do I want to make this page look like? Right. Exactly. Very good. Okay. So I'm going to, let's say, I'm going to do something to the body of this document. Okay. And I am going to say that I want the background color to be yellow. I like working with color when showing this stuff because it's very visual. Oh, yeah. Okay.
It's obvious what you're going to change.
Yes, and it's also going to be ugly. I promise. Okay, this is I promise. Okay.
So I have a question. So
yes.
I assume all these what is the background color thing called? It's
property.
Properties. There's somewhere you can look all these up.
Oh yeah. I'm working from memory here.
Yeah.
You eventually get to know the ones you use most often.
Right.
To have me sit here and just go through a list of the possibilities would take hours.
No.
Right.
That's what I'm just saying, that there's a place where you can look
any
them up.
online CSS reference, any book on CSS will give you all of the possibilities, and some of them will even show you charts as to which browsers they work in and all these other things. Pretty much anything I'm going to show in this session will work in all browsers. We're keeping it pretty simple here. So I'm going to publish this page here and see if, remember I'm working from memory. Haha, it worked. So please expect that I will make a mistake at some point. So now what we said is the background color to our page is yellow. Okay. So now the next question I ask myself is, do I want to do anything else to the body of the document? Well,
probably.
Yeah, probably. And one of the things I want to do, and this is where you can start to see how this is much easier than tables, is I might want to have some margins on each side of my page. Okay. Now, what used to happen is you would create a single-celled table, and set the width of the table and center the table, and that way you had margins on the left and the right. Okay, camera over here, left and the right. I'm sorry, I've been waving off screen. I apologize for that. Okay, or maybe you preferred it that way. I don't know. There actually is margin control built into CSS. Okay, now, kind of in a live class here, I would say, well, okay, what do I want to change the margins of? Well, I want to change the margins of the body. So should I go here and write a new line, start going body, or squirrely bracket? No, I can actually put multiple declarations on a single selector. Okay, let me just show you what I mean by that, because Krista's giving me that blank look of I know I've heard those words before, but that's fine. This is where the semicolon comes in. I'm going to go after yellow. I'm going to say semicolon. And then I could keep typing on the same line, but typically what people will do is go to the next line and then kind of space in to make it a little more readable. And I'm going to say margin hyphen left 10%. And another semicolon, and then on a new line I'm going to say margin hyphen right also 10%. Okay, so what I've done here, do I have a typo? Oh, yep, colon instead of a semicolon. There we go. So what the semicolon does is it says, okay, there's the first thing I want to change. I'm done with that. Now I want to change something else. So you can stack these, basically. Now, if anybody in the room knows a little CSS, there are things you can do to abbreviate. Instead of specifying margin left and right separately, there are ways I can compact that and say other things. We don't have the time. I'm keeping it simple here. So
when you start doing a lot of it, you'll want to probably do that.
Yes, there are ways to shorten your code and abbreviate, and yeah. So I'm going to publish this page and see our differences. And now, as you will see, I have left and right margins without using a table. Yay! Okay, so now I ask myself, what else do I want to do? Well, let's say I want to do something in my paragraphs, because I've got some paragraphs. And so I'm going to P in this case. And you know what, spacing doesn't really matter, but as you watch me type this, you start to see you want to line things up just to make things easier to read.
Well, it's just like in HTML, the same thing. You put in blank lines to separate stuff out just for your own visual.
Yes.
So it's not all smooshed together. You can read it nicely.
I could write this whole page as one giant long line of text.
Yeah. That
but
would be
how fun?
edit or
yes, that would be not fun to edit.
Find this particular section to do something with later. Yeah.
Okay. And so what I'm going to do here is, and I'm going to, let's see here. I'm going to work with color again. So I'm going to say color : red. What do you think that'll do?
The text is red?
Yep. I have now said all paragraphs, the color of the text will be red. It's not text color.
Be ugly.
This is what I call hot dog stand.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay, you know, very...
red on yellow. Yeah.
You're red on yellow. Okay, so we've done that. And then let's say, what else do I want to do? Change the font, maybe? Okay, so let's go back to editing. Come on, there we go. Scroll back up here. And so I'm going to add a semicolon and a new line, and I'm going to say font hyphen family. Now, here's what gets really interesting. I'm going to try to take it to the next level here just a smidge. Okay. Have you ever gotten in this situation where you've picked a font and then you've brought it up on another computer and that computer doesn't have the font?
Yeah.
Yeah, like my PowerPoint presentation. Exactly. Bingo. Okay. This has been a problem for web designers for years. Okay. You pick this really cool font and then somebody else pulls it up on their computer and they don't have the font. So what happens?
It doesn't look like you.
Right. So what you can do in CSS is you can kind of specify a list of fonts to choose from. Okay. So, for example, I can say Calibre, or no, it's not Calibre. That's a software program. Well, fine. We'll stick with Arial. Verdana. Okay, I like Verdana. Okay. And now, but what if they don't have Verdana? Well, I can say comma space Arial.
Oh, if they don't have that, use something else?
Yeah. I can specify a list of choices to pick from. Now, then there's this concept of a family, and this is where you didn't know you were going to get a basic typography lesson here, but there are groups of fonts that fit into a family. The family that Verdana and Arial are in are sans serif. In other words, they don't have the little feet. Okay, there are serif fonts such as Times New Roman. There are monospace fonts such as Courier. There are fantasy fonts such as what's that one? Nobody like Comic Sans. And then there are cursive fonts, such as handwriting sort of fonts. So generally, what you recommend in CSS is you stick to a list of fonts in the same family, and then as your last option, you list one of those families. So what I've said here is, dear browser who is viewing this, please look for Verdana. If you have it, use it. If you don't, look for Arial. If you have it, use it. If you don't, pick whatever your default sans serif font is, which on Windows will be Arial, by the way. So the idea is that even if you can't get the font I want, please at least get in the neighborhood. Okay? So I'm going to publish that, and as you'll see, we now have our Verdana. It should be Verdana in this case. It might be Arial, but
they're so close it's hard.
Yeah, they are close. Okay, but suddenly it's a lot more readable than Times New Roman, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, and so there's some things here you can do with that. Okay, so back to editing, and I'm going to do one more thing to the paragraphs before I kind of move on here. I am then also going to say text-align, and this is where you can do left, center, or right. But there's also a choice called justify. What do you think that'll do?
Didn't do any, oh,
yes,
it
did.
The right side
Full
feeling.
justification, left and right hand side. Maybe that's easy to read. I used to work for somebody who was our publicity person. She used to work in newspapers. She hated full justification.
Really?
With a
That's
passion.
how newspapers do it.
I know, and she hated it. Because sometimes the spacing gets a little weird.
Yes, I don't like it
If you look at this
either.
line right here, you can kind of see that the letters are really spaced out.
It makes it harder to read.
Sometimes.
When the spacing is like that.
And I will just throw this out here. I don't want any big debate about it, but that's how books are published. You read it all the time.
Yeah, but
I didn't know. I agree with you. It's sometimes on the screen to some people it just doesn't work as well. It really depends. Okay. So as you can see here, I'm doing things to all my paragraphs, and I'm going to actually do one more thing here. I'm going to go ahead and add another piece of content just to show you what you can do here. And I'm going to say H1. Okay, so I'm going to create a nice heading. CSS test page. Okay, we'll just take a look at that real quick. And there's my heading level 1. If I go back to editing, I can go in here and say H1. And what do I want to do to it? Well, let's see, text align center. And just to prove this works, color colon blue. Just to show you, you can keep typing on one line if you want. And I'm even then going to say, oh boy, my memory is failing me. Text hyphen size 40 point. It's going to be really big.
Yeah.
Not too bad. Actually, I think I got it wrong. I think it's font hyphen size, not text hyphen size.
It didn't seem to change.
No, it didn't change. That's
the
because
color and the centering.
I told you I would make a mistake. It's font hyphen size 40 point, and there we go. Nice and big. Now, don't get happy with, oh look, I can specify a point size. A whole separate hour would be the different units of measurement you have available to you in CSS. There's about 12 of them. As you'll notice, in some cases, I've already used percentages for my margins, but I've used points for my font size. You can use inches, centimeters, millimeters, ems, ends, pixels, points, and percentages. So there's 9. and it's a whole discussion about when you would use one or the other. So brief? Remember that brief part? Yes. This is very brief.
The very basics to get you started knowing why it's good, why it's useful, why you might want to use
exactly.
it instead of what you've been doing.
Right. Now, let's take this just a little further here. Wow, it's already 11:15.
I was going to say,
okay.
Are you watching the clock?
Yeah, I'm watching the clock. Okay, let's take this a little further here, and I'm going to start talking about other things you can do. Okay. There is two concepts in CSS that really, if you're already sold, this was the easy sell. There's a harder sell, but once you get the hang of it, it really makes CSS even stronger. And they're called classes and IDs. And in the interest of time, I'm only going to cover classes. Okay? So let's say, for example, that every once in a while, somewhere in any of my web pages, I'm going to have something that I think is extremely important. Okay? And whenever I think that I have something extremely important, I want to make it, I want to give it a background, I want to change its color, and I want to make it bold and italicized. I mean, I really want to, I want to make this thing stand out like no tomorrow. Okay? Yep. Believe it or not, Blink is available in CSS, but no browser actually supports it. Thank you, browsers. Blink does exist. Okay, so let's get really obnoxious here. So what I'm going to do is in my CSS, I'm going to, instead of using a paragraph or a heading or the body, I'm going to start something with a dot. This means I'm now creating something out of whole cloth. Okay, and I'm going to call this dot very important. Okay, and I'm going to say that whenever it's very important, I want it to have a background color of black, and I want its font's color to be white, and I want its weight to be bold, and I want its font style to be italic, okay, and I want to put a border around it that is 3 pixels thick, dashed, and white. Okay, I'm throwing a lot at you here. Did I misspell wit? White. There we go. I can't talk and type at the same time.
You did everything else.
Okay. Now, by itself, this does absolutely nothing. I have created what's called a class. Okay, this is a two-stage process. Mm-hmm. What I now need to do is I need to classify something as being very important. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick this third paragraph. And now switching back to HTML for a minute, I'm going to say class equals very important. Now notice I did not include the dot here. Okay, mm-hmm. So what I have done is I have classified this paragraph as being very important. So when it sees class equals very important, it should go back to the CSS and say, okay, what do I do to things that have been classified as very important? Okay? Let's see what happens. I told you ugly.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Very important. And I could do, I mean, I probably what I would also do is I would make it so the text doesn't bump up against the border.
Yeah, give a
okay.
buffer there.
And you know, real quick, just this is where, you know, building CSS is fun because you go, oh, that doesn't look right. What do I need to change? Well, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a padding of 10 pixels and republish that. Padding is inside a box versus outside a box, which is margins.
Mm-hmm. That's much better.
And so now much more readable. Okay, still very ugly, but much more readable. So, but classes are very flexible. I can apply them whenever and wherever I need them. Okay? Now, I applied it to this paragraph, but if I wanted to, I could also apply it to the heading. Class equals very important. And what's going to happen there is this is where we kind of get into the cascade. Now we've got, it's going to do this because it's an H1, but then it's going to do this because it's very important. Okay? And so it will still be centered, but it's going to be white, not blue, because that's the last rule it read.
Mm.
It will still be 40 point because there's no rule here that overrides that.
Not the same one again.
Okay. So notice I've just also significantly upgraded the complexity level of my code just by doing this. But if I publish that, see, it's still centered and still 40 point, but it's got all that other stuff because I said it's very important. Okay. All right. So I'm going to stop there.
So you can see how useless this is really starting to get into more design type things of like not just content of I need to have the info out there on my website, but I can now be more pickier about how it looks.
Yes,
yeah.
this is the design in web design. Really, I mean,
which to some people is the fun part.
Yeah,
I mean,
to some people it's very fun. To some people it's very frustrating.
Too long. Oh no, I wanted 2 more pixels this way, or that kind of garbage. But
yes, there is someone in the building who works on some, not our website, but some other websites. Who I love her dearly. But I get the emails. Okay, my CSS is not working. It's not lining up right. It's 2 pixels off. And we sit down and we stare at it and we figure it out. And it's usually something in the CSS that is just not lining up exactly right. And yeah, it can be frustrating. And sometimes I will say to her, "Is this worth the effort to fix, or is it good enough?"
Yeah.
That is, and I leave it up to her.
what I really like about it, because I'm using it for one of the parts of the commission site that I work on, having one place to futz with it as far as doing the external one, and then it populates to all like 10 pages I have that have to do with this particular project I'm doing. It's like, that's awesome. Okay. I don't have to go to 10 pages and make all these changes anymore.
Now, let me show you how that would work really quick. And to do that, I have to get out of this paste HTML. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all this, and I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to shrink this down and get this out of the way too. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go to Notepad here. Okay. Ooh, yeah, Notepad. Okay, I'm going to paste it all in. Okay. Now here's all my code in Notepad. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save this on my desktop as test.html. Okay, and I'm going to make sure this changes to that and click save. Okay. And so that's on my desktop. You guys just can't see it because we've kind of hidden the desktop. All right. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take just my CSS code, and I'm going to cut that out of here, and I'm going to go into another Notepad window, and I'm going to paste that in. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this as test.css. Okay. So now what I've got is I've got 2 files. I've got a test.css and I've got a test.html, which is my web page. Now, notice the web page now has no CSS information in it whatsoever. Okay? So now if I actually go to my browser and I open up that file on my desktop to test.html, okay, there I'm back to left justified, black on white, no CSS. That's what it looks like.
Started with.
Right. Yeah. I'm back to what I started with. So now what I'm going to do in that HTML, now I don't really need these lines anymore, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of those. Okay. I am in the head of my document. I'm going to say this. Link rel equals style sheet. Type equals text/CSS. href equals test.css.
What is rel?
Relationship. Okay. So what I'm saying is I'm linking to another file. The relationship of that file to this one is it's a style sheet. What type of style sheet? It's a CSS style sheet. And then like in a hyperlink to another web page, I need to point to that style sheet.
Where it's going.
Tell where it is. And now if it was in a different directory, I would have to specify that. But since
wherever it is.
They're both on the desktop, so it should find it. Okay, so I'm going to save this. And now I should, if I've done everything right, working from memory here, get everything back. Okay. So now, literally, this is now I've created an external style sheet. And all I literally have to do is in every one of my HTML pages include this line of code. And as long as it includes that line of code,
it'll always go back.
Yep,
to that.
anything I do to my CSS file will affect all of those pages.
I like that. You're building a website.
Unbelievably handy. Now, sometimes, okay, let's say this is real quick. Let's say this is one of my 7,000 pages. Okay. But on this page, I want it to be left justified. I don't know why. Don't argue style with me here. Just, work with me.
As an example.
Okay. But something in test CSS says that this is going to be fully justified, left and right margins. Okay. Well, what I can do here is I can kind of go back and real quick, style, type, holes, style, type equals quote text / CSS, end style. And then here say P text hyphen align : left. So what I've done here is I've said read the external CSS file, do whatever it says, but on this page, put the paragraphs left justified. Okay, this is that cascade that I was talking about earlier. And so now if I refresh this, this page is left justified, but any other page that points to the CSS file will be fully justified.
So you have kind of like here's the main how one everything should look, but if you want a particular page of something special, you can still do that to that one.
It's kind of like creating an exception to the rule.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Okay. All right. Let's go back to my slides. Boy, writing that code takes fast. Yeah. So here's the cascade, and I've kind of broadened it out just a little bit here, okay? Because I talked about external, embedded, and then inline. And to be honest, I didn't get to inline. And I will tell you, inline is actually very rarely used. So I wasn't too worried about not getting to it. But notice I've expanded that to include the browser and the user. Okay? The browser comes first because the browser, by default, does things to your code. Okay? Then it's whatever you say as the coder, okay? And it will read the external stuff first, then it will read the embedded, and then it will read the inline, and whatever rule it reads last is the one that counts. But then, as I mentioned earlier, due to accessibility issues, the user always has final say. Okay? So it's kind of downhill in that order. Whatever rule it reads last is the rule that will stick. Now, just as an aside, there's a way to break that, but I don't like telling people about it. Because the user should always have final say, I would argue. Okay. Something that I can't get to, but I need to mention here is something called the box model in CSS. And just because I need to be a little evil in every presentation I do, this is the box model. I did not draw this. This is the official in the specifications what the box model looks like.
Okay.
Briefly, okay, here, folks, briefly, and trust me, explaining this well is an hour conversation in and of itself. But I changed the margins on my body, and that was kind of on the outside of everything, okay? But then remember when I put that paragraph in a box and then I moved the text inside the box away from the edge, okay? The border was the box. Padding is inside, margin is outside, okay? And then... But so you have your content, then you have your padding working out, then you have your border, and then you have your margin. Okay? Here's the fun part. You can control each one of those three things, padding, border, and margin, independently. And then each of the four sides you can control independently. Notice, remember, I changed the left margin and the right margin, but I did not change the top and bottom. I could have made all four of them the same. I could have made all four of them different. I could have specified only do something to one of them. I could have specified do something to two of them. All right. Yeah. Yeah. But here's the other cool thing. Once you understand the box model, you can start moving the boxes around on the screen. So let's say you want columns. Okay. You just put a box around the content of one column and a box around the content of the second column, and then you say put this one over here and put this one over here, and now you have columns without using tables.
Right.
So the box model is kind of...
It's like a lot more flexibility than a table.
Oh, totally. And you know what? You can not only move those boxes, you can move those boxes with literally pixel-perfect XY coordinates and Z coordinates. You can start working backwards and forward through layers of the page if you want to.
Jeez. Wow.
Okay? And just to throw out something kind of really out there at the moment, a lot of web pages that have drop-down menus, okay, what's actually going on is those menus are actually displayed just off the side of the screen until you put your mouse in a certain location, and then they get moved to where your mouse is.
Oh, I don't even know that.
And it just looks like they popped up, but really what they've done is they've actually moved. They've moved from off-screen to the left, because you can never scroll left. You can always scroll right, but you can never scroll left. And then move to where you want them when your mouse moves to a certain location on the screen.
Sneaky.
Yeah, I mean, that's the power of CSS. I mean, there's so much you can possibly do with that. Speaking of the box model, I must say that CSS is awesome. Notice how awesome is outside the box. Yeah, that's the box model is quirky. I want that mug, actually. And then ultimately,
an actual mug you can get?
Yeah, that's an actual mug you can get. Brief. We started 56 minutes, 56 minutes ago, and I feel like I've barely covered anything. I just, I hope this has intrigued you enough that if you're not using it already, and especially if you're looking to redesign your website, that you have to use CSS these days. In fact, I started saying this about 6 years ago. If you aren't using CSS in your website today, you're shooting yourself in the foot. It will just cause problems for you in the long run. Okay, and eventually, there's tons of books out there. Just a small sample. I like the missing manual ones. Those are pretty good. The definitive guide one over to the right there, that's an O'Reilly book. That's pretty good. And then eventually you do become a CSS Ninja. Sorry, another CSS joke. I apologize. I just had to throw that in there because you can hide things. Anyway, so that's my talk with 3 minutes to spare. Do we have any outstanding questions?
No questions came in during the session. Does anybody have any questions you want to ask Michael right now? We do have some time if you like.
Yeah, I'm almost wondering what would you ask.
and need to go and play with this, that's cool. You can use that site. We'll put that link up to that site when we post
it's in the slides. We'll include the link. Yeah, it's Paste HTML is that site.
But, if you can't think of anything right now, of course, call. That's what he's here for.
Send me an email.
Call, email. Send an email.
Send email. It works better if we start. If we need to get on the phone, we'll get on the phone. But, I do generally say to people, happy to help with code. Two things I've always said. Number one is if you ask me for what do you think of this design, I will be honest. Okay, so if you do ask me for design advice, I will give it. I have opinions, but I'm not a professional designer. So that doesn't mean I'm right, but I have opinions. Everybody does. And if you want help with code, yes, explain what your problem is, but please send me the code.
That will help.
Because without actually looking at the code, there isn't much I can do. That's why whenever the person in the building asks for help, I always go down to her office and sit right next to her and say, okay, bring up your code. And partially luckily to me, most people don't actually ever take me up on these offers. So, but it has happened. I am happy to help to the best of my ability. So.
Well, it doesn't look like anything's come in while we've been questions.
No.
That's great. I'm glad you guys attended, and hopefully you learned something about doing your CSS. As I said, I'm using it for some pages here now, and so I'm getting more into it myself. So that will wrap it up for today. Hope you'll join us next week, those of you that are interested. Next Wednesday, April 6th, our NCompass Live is Nebraska Online Legal Self-Help Center. We'll have people from the Nebraska State Court Administrator's Office debuting their new online legal self-help website where people can go to get information on how you can represent yourself in Nebraska courts. So if you need to, it So very cool. They're just putting out a new website, and they've decided to debut it with us here at NCompass Live.
Oh,
so
great.
if you want to, hopefully we'll see you next week for that. And then I think we're good. Thank you very much. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.